Chapter 17. Mrs. Joyce. With each step, Lydia had tried to rub her neck harder and harder. Only now it wasn't just the neck that was prickling. It was as if each drop of blood in her body had turned into a tiny red-hot needle that was trying to pierce its way through her skin. She gritted her teeth and scratched the back of her legs and the front of her arms. It didn't help. "Where are we?" Lydia risked speaking after at least 30 minutes of silence. "Under the moors," Fran whispered. "It should be safe to come out here." "Why the moors?" Lydia asked. "Why can't we just go back to your house? The tyrant knows that Mike and I are friends, so he'll send his night guards straight there, looking for you." "And me," Fran replied. "And if we're found in anyone else's house, it will be instant termination for both of us and for the family that hides us." "I don't believe it. It's happened before," Fran insisted. What could Lydia say? There was nothing to say. "We'll have to lie low for a while," Frank continued. "On the moors, hiding on such a wide open space seemed like suicide. It's the best place, believe me," Fran smiled. "I suppose you know what you're doing," Lydia said doubtfully. They turned left and began to walk up a dirt slope, and Fran pushed at some bracken and moss above her head at the top of the slope. Lydia closed her eyes and clenched her fists. "My skin isn't on fire. My skin isn't on fire," she told herself. "It didn't work." "Come on, Lydia," Fran beckoned. Lydia crawled out of the tunnel after Fran, and she looked around. They was totally alone. Then she saw it. Rolling towards them from the horizon was a massive swirl of burning pink and yellow and fiery red. The same as before, when Lydia had run away from home to walk on the moors. It wasn't just some clouds that were heading their way. It was as if the whole sky was rushing towards them. Lydia stared up at the racing colours, and her stomach dipped and dived with her. It was still the most frightening and yet the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever seen. Why did she feel so drawn to it and yet so repelled by it at the same time? "What is that?" Lydia pointed. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it before." Fran shook her head. With great difficulty, Lydia forced herself to look away. "What do we know? What do we do now, Fran?" Fran didn't hear her. She was still staring at the swirling sky colours. "Fran," Lydia shook Fran's arm. "What do we do now?" It took a few moments for Fran to come out of her reverie. "Sorry," she breathed. "I better phone Dad and tell him where I am." Fran took out her smartphone and touched the bottom of the screen before saying, "Phone Dad." Lydia moved closer to see what she was doing. "What's that?" "A phone," said Fran. "Why didn't you use it when you were in the tunnels?" "Wouldn't have been safe," Lydia asked. "Phones don't work down in the tunnels," Fran frowned. "You really don't know anything, do you? I'm from the past, remember?" said Lydia. Lydia remembered that it was the year she was supposed to die. She'd never see her next birthday. "So is Daniel Henson your brother?" Fran asked carefully. Lydia nodded. "Did he believe you?" "No, according to Daniel. I died. Well, his sister died," Lydia said miserably. "And I tried to tell him about my accident on the moors, but he wouldn't listen. He thinks I'm part of the resistance." "And you've operated on my face to make it look like his dead sister." "You died?" Fran said, horrified. "Oh, Lydia, I don't know what to say." "Well, it hasn't happened yet, and meanwhile I've got to make Daniel stop what he's doing. He hates this whole town and everyone in it because of me," said Lydia. "Because of me? I don't understand." Lydia chewed nervously on her bottom lip. I didn't tell you the whole story before," Lydia admitted. "The reason I was on the moors in the first place was because I ran away from home." "Why?" Lydia looked towards the swirling colours, which were getting ever closer. She had to fight hard against the urge to run towards them. They were almost like invisible hands pulling at her. She looked away. "Everyone at my school thinks I'm a thief. The whole town thinks I'm a thief. But I'm not. The Colivell School Sports Cup went missing and it was found in my locker," said Lydia quietly. "Everyone turned against me, even my best friend, Frankie. I got surrounded in the playground and called a thief. They wouldn't stop picking on me. Then Frankie had an accident and I got blamed for that too." "The Colivell Sports Cup?" Fran stared at Lydia. "Yeah, isn't that stupid?" Lydia smiled bitterly. "It seems so far away, so tiny. All this started because of a school sports cup." Lydia closed her eyes and tilted her head back until she could trust herself to speak again. "Frankie slipped on some ice. It was just an accident, but I can't help wondering if I'd just been a bit faster. Maybe I could have caught her and stopped her from falling. Or maybe if I hadn't slapped her hand away from me in the first place, then she wouldn't have fallen." "Oh my God, that was you?" Fran stared at Lydia profoundly, shocked. "Lydia, Mum didn't blame you at all." She always said it was her own fault. She slipped and you tried to grab her, but you couldn't. That's what she told everyone. Lydia shrugged and looked away. Frankie was too late. I ran away because a reporter came to our house and we started getting phone calls and Mum and Dad got paint thrown over their car. Lydia shivered at the memory. Daniel told me that Mum and Dad were driving us to my aunt's house in London to get away from all the unpleasantness, and that's when the motorway accident happens. That's when I'm killed. Lydia, I think... Fran chewed on her bottom lip nervously. Hang on a second. Fran moved a few steps away from Lydia, then keyed some numbers into her phone. Within moments, Mrs. Joyce's face appeared, covering the whole of the voice. Mrs. Joyce, you're back. I was worried that the night guards might have decided to keep you for longer than one night, said Fran. They've never got anything out on me, and they never will, Mrs. Joyce snorted. That's just my weekly dose of harassment, courtesy of the tyrant. Lyd, my friend and I are on the moors, Fran explained quickly. We need to see you. It's really important. Where's Mike? Mrs. Joyce frowned. Fran gave Lydia a worried look. I'm sorry, Mrs. Joyce, but the tyrant has him in his mansion, Fran replied. Oh my God, what happened? Mike took us to the tyrant's mansion, but they were waiting for us, Fran explained. He did what? Mrs. Joyce exploded. He couldn't be that stupid. Why did he do it? It's a bit difficult to explain. No, never mind, not over the phone, Mrs. Joyce interrupted harshly. Mike? Lydia moved closer to Fran to see the phone screen, but Mrs. Joyce had her head bent, as if she didn't want anyone to see the pain she was going through. Fran pushed Lydia away as Mrs. Joyce straightened up. Lydia frowned at her, wondering what was going on. Is he all right? Mrs. Joyce's face was now a mask. She could have been asking about the weather. When I last saw him, he was. Fran said. Mike won't tell the tyrant anything. Mrs. Joyce seemed to be speaking more to herself than Fran. She added with a bitter laugh, Daniel Henson really hates us, doesn't he? Lydia frowned at Fran. Although she couldn't see Mrs. Joyce's face, she could still hear what was being said, and instinctively she knew that Mrs. Joyce wasn't talking about Daniel hating the whole town. She was talking about Daniel hating her and Mike specifically. Lydia was sure of it. Mrs. Joyce, can we come to your house? Is it safe yet? Fran asked again. No, you can't come here. The whole town is crawling with guards, and at least half of them are surrounding my house. I'll have to come to you, but don't worry, I'll get past them, said Mrs. Joyce. Okay, we'll meet you in Sector 4M in 20 minutes, said Fran. She pressed the button and hung up. Lydia turned towards the colours which lit up the dawn sky. White lighting flashed from the clouds, but there was no thunder, no rain. Maybe it's an electrical storm, Lydia wondered. Whatever it was still approaching. We'd better get going. We're meeting Mrs. Joyce just outside the town, so we'll have to be careful. And you'll have to change your clothes as soon as possible. The guards will be looking for you, and they know what you're wearing, Fran said. Shouldn't we warn Mrs. Joyce that my brother knows about the tunnels? Asked Lydia. The night guards never enter the tunnels. They're far too easy to pick off, said Fran. They'll use the tracker mobiles, and Mrs. Joyce can handle them. Even so, shouldn't we tell Mrs. Joyce? It isn't safe. We can't say too much. We can't risk the guards tapping into our transmission and tracking us down, said Fran. Besides, that's not the reason I want us to meet up with Mrs. Joyce. Lydia waited for Fran to continue. Worried and indecision flitted over Fran's face. She kicked at the ground beneath her feet. All of a sudden, she couldn't look at Lydia. What's the matter? Lydia, do you really want to help us? Fran asked at last. Of course I do, even though Daniel is your brother. What he's doing is wrong, said Lydia without hesitation. I just want him to stop. And what about returning to your own time, said Fran. I don't know, Lydia whispered. I'm afraid to go back if it means I'm going to die. But I don't belong here either. I don't know what to do or how to do it. Lydia, I know about the Collavelle Sports Cup. Do you? Fran nodded. My mum told me before she died. She told me about it going missing and someone in her class being blamed for taking it even though they hadn't. She told me that person's name though. She didn't realise that it was Lydia Henson, the tyrant's... I didn't realise it was Lydia Henson, the tyrant's sister. Lydia frowned and waited for Fran to continue. Don't you understand? Fran said urgently. I never realised that that person accused of taking the cup and Daniel's sister were one and the same person. That explains so much. Very few grown-ups know about this, and those who do, they never talk about it. I still don't understand. Lydia shook her head. Fran sighed. My middle name is Lydia, you know. My mum. She named me after you. Did she? Did she really? Lydia beamed like a Cheshire cat. Lydia, Mrs. Joyce can tell you the truth about how the cup got into your locker. How would she know anything about it? Lydia asked. I think she should explain that. Not me, Fran replied. Lydia huffed with exasperation. Fran was being so mysterious, it was driving her crazy, but it was obvious that something was troubling Fran deeply. She put her arm around Fran's shoulders and smiled, and Fran looked at her, but didn't smile back. We'd better get going, Fran said unhappily. Lydia took one last look at the colours and the lights flashing behind them, before she purposely turned her back and walked beside Fran across the moors. They made their way into silence to Sector M4, which was about a mile away from where Lydia had first seen Fran, and after a quick look around, Fran said, "We'll be safer sitting down." Lydia sat down, still looking around. The moors held very little cover and rolled towards the horizon in all directions. Lydia imagined the night guards jumping out at them at any second, but she knew that wasn't possible. There was no way the night guards could sneak up on them from any direction without one of them seeing the guards first. "Look over there," Fran pointed. Lydia did as directed, and in the distance she could see two figures gliding along. The night guards patrol the moors each morning and evening. They stand on their patrol boards and chat while they travel around the perimeter of the moors. It's a 5-hour journey, but they don't have to take a step. That's what they call patrolling. Lucky for us that they're so lazy. Lydia watched them for a moment. The guards were moving on about what looked like hovering skateboards. The boards made no sound, at least none that she could hear at this distance, and travelled at about 40 centimetres off the ground. It was so weird watching the guards glide along silently. "Are you okay?" asked Fran. Lydia shrugged and nodded. "I'm a bit tired, but I'll survive." She turned to Fran. "Now, are you going to tell me what's the matter?" Fran shook her head. She dug a hand into the earth beside her and she let it trickle through her fingers. "Lydia, my mum was always on your side. She knew you didn't take the sports cup. Mum always reckoned that Anne Turner did it, although she never managed to find any proof. She was working on Anne to try and prove it when you were killed," Fran said. She was? She never told me that," Lydia said. "Mum said she tried, but you wouldn't listen. She told me that she tried to talk to you one time in a supermarket and another time at school just before the end of term. I know about the supermarket. That happened, yesterday, or the day before, or 37 years ago, depending on how you look at it." Lydia realised ruefully. "Frankie wanted to talk to me, but I was too angry to listen. That's when she had her accident." "I wish you had listened to her," Fran sighed. "So do I," Lydia agreed. "I will do when I get back to my aunt's home." If I get back. "Oh yeah, not everything has happened yet," Fran remembered. "This is so peculiar." "Tell me about it," Lydia said dryly. "You keep talking about things in the past tense, things that haven't even happened to me yet." "You two should pay more attention to who's sneaking up behind you." Mrs. Joyce's angry voice made Lydia jump, and she and Fran sprang to their feet immediately. "You scared us," Fran breathed. "Good. Then maybe next time you'll chat and keep a lookout at the same time," said Mrs. Joyce, grabbing Fran by her arms and shaking her. Lydia tried to pull Fran away from Mrs. Joyce's angry grasp. "Is that how my son got caught? Is it by chatting to you and not paying attention? We were ambushed as soon as Mike and I set foot out of the tunnel. Daniel's night guards were there waiting for us." Lydia lowered her gaze when Mrs. Joyce looked at her and kicked moodily at the dirt beneath her feet. It was a trap. They knew about the tunnels. Now that Lydia and the tyrant and her brother were definitely one and the same, she couldn't bear to call him by that name. "Is that why you two dragged me all the way out here, to explain about my son?" Mrs. Joyce's ice-cold voice chilled Lydia. "What were you two doing there in the first place?" "I asked for Mike's help. I wanted to see Daniel Henson," Lydia admitted. "And my fool of a son took you through the tunnels?" Mrs. Joyce gave a bitter laugh. Lydia looked up. Mrs. Joyce gasped with shocked amazement. Lydia stared. Mrs. Joyce looked just like... But she couldn't be. She just couldn't be. "Mrs. Joyce, this is why I asked you to come," Fran said. "Lydia's full name is Lydia Henson. Lydia Angela Henson." Mrs. Joyce's head whipped around. She stared at Fran, then turned back to Lydia, her eyes growing wider and wider. You can't be. I don't believe it. Lydia's dead, Mrs. Joyce whispered. No, she isn't. She was caught in a storm and pitched into the future, to our time, said Fran. Mrs. Joyce came closer until her face was only centimetres away from Lydia's. A mixture of disbelief and suspicion and wonder played across her face. Lydia backed away, her heart slamming against her ribs. This was a grown woman, Mike's mum, a stranger. It couldn't be. Lydia, Mrs. Joyce's name, before she got married, was Turner, said Fran quietly. Her name is Anne. Anne Turner. She's the one who put the cup in your locker.